I'm just going to close this window. Once again, I do want to thank everybody for the time this afternoon as we look at the end user features of Ally. So we're going to talk about the alternative formats and the instructor feedback tools. But we're going to begin by really looking at workflow. So as you know, traditionally, as courses are being built and designed, either the instructor or a course designer, someone is adding content to the course. So they may be uploading, Word documents. They could be creating, HTML files, adding links, etc. And with Ally, none of that changes. So the courses are still going to be built in the exact same way. Just as a little background, when we first connected Ally to your Brightspace environment, Ally went through and scanned all existing content and assigned it an accessibility score. And we'll talk about how that score is calculated in just a minute. But from here on out, anytime any piece of content is added to a course, Ally is notified. It's going to grab that content. It's going to quickly scan it, assign it the score, and you should see, as an instructor, you will see evidence of that score in the course. Students will never see any information about accessibility. They only have access to the alternative formats. So really the takeaway from this first slide is you shouldn't have to alter anything you do in relation to course building. You're not going to have to first upload something to one site, get it checked, and then bring it back to Brightspace. Everything happens within the LMS itself. The goal is to really reduce the barriers to entry to using Ally in your current LMS. So we mentioned that, previously Ally has scanned all existing content and will continue to scan content as it's added. And what that means is when it grabs it, it's running that content through a checklist. And some of those checks are very high level. So it's looking at, first of all, what type of document it is. Is it a Word document? Is it HTML, PDF, etc.? And then based on that, it's going to go through another series of checks to look at for different accessibility issues in that content. And there's around 80 different checks that Ally is going to look at. And you can see I have a link there for the full checklist of what Ally is looking at. This is not based on anything the Ally group came up with independently. These are based on the WCAG 2.1 standards. So that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And as those evolve, what Ally is going to check for may evolve as well. So it can be helpful to look at that list every once in a while just to see what Ally is looking for in terms of accessibility. Please don't worry about taking that link down. Again, I'll make sure you have a copy of these slides at the end. We also mentioned that Ally is giving each piece of content a score. And that score is going to range from a 0% to a 100%, where 0 is considered very inaccessible and 100% means very good in terms of accessibility. This is a weighted average of those results, that checklist of items that Ally is looking for. And so what happens is whenever Ally sees a new piece of content, it's going to assume that that content is perfect, give it a score of 100%. And then it's going to start going through that checklist. Any accessibility issues it finds, that score is going to go down. If the issue is considered very severe, the score will go down a great deal. If it's a more minor issue, the score will go down by as much. So for example, a scanned PDF tends to be considered a very severe accessibility issue. Uh, those documents tend to receive a score of a 0%, so very inaccessible. Ally is also going to do checks as fine as a character by character look for contrast. So maybe a lighter font and a lighter background, which may be hard for some users to see. Those issues aren't considered as major, so that score will still go down, but it would not go down by as much as, say, a scanned document would. So what a user is going to end up with is a score in a document that's going to give some sort of reflection of how accessible that item, that particular piece of content really is. If it has a lot of different accessibility issues, it might potentially affect more students. And certainly the lower the score, the more severely it may affect those individuals. Now, this algorithm and formula was not, again, developed independently by the Ally Group. This is based on research done by the W3C, that World Wide Web Consortium, that also oversees the WCAG standards. So what I want to do is kind of talk a little bit about the alternative formats, just some general, benefits for them that are available immediately to students. As we go through this, I'll refer to alternative formats as being primarily used as students. They are certainly accessible by, faculty and instructors as well. But since students tend to be the primary users, I will just typically say students without saying students and instructors every time. Once we kind of take a quick overview of the alternative formats, we'll look at each one individually to see how they might be used. So the alternative formats are going to give a couple of quick benefits right off the top um, to your students. So in some cases, the alternative format might provide a more accessible starting point. So we mentioned the scanned PDF previously and how we said that was a very inaccessible document. One of the alternative formats offered by Ally is an OCR version or optical character recognition, which is a much more accessible version of that scanned document. So if we were to create that alternative format and have it scored by Ally, the score on that document would be much higher than the initial scanned version. Uh, this is done without any additional action required by the instructor. Those alternative formats are set up automatically when content is uploaded. So all the student needs to do is download it. The instructor doesn't have to do anything. The other big benefit is it's going to give students a choice in how they want to consume that content. So you may have a number of commuters who may not have a lot of time to sit down and read a Word document, but Ally is going to provide an audio format so they can listen to it while they're commuting or going on a walk or working around the house so that they can really multitask and make the best use of their time. This is it really is not going to change any of the workflow done by the students. So when they go to your Brightspace environment, they're going to see an alternative formats icon located next to the content, usually above it. When they click on it, they'll see a menu of choices and they can download whichever one they want to their local device. So they're not going to have to go to another Ally site to sign in with a different username or password. Everything happens within the LMS itself. So again, it's really going to make it easy for students to use. And the way alternative formats work is for any particular file, the first time it is requested by a user, Ally is going to generate it, and then it's going to be cached on Ally's side. So it's going to be saved on Ally's side, not in your Brightspace environment. It's not going to take up any other space. And then it'll be available to download to the user's local computer. And that cached file will be saved for 30 days. So that the next time someone requests that file, it's available instantly. It does not need to be generated again. If, however, during that or after that 30-day period, if no one's requested it, it gets deleted off the Ally side just for space saving purposes. But if someone requests it then again later, it just gets regenerated. If it gets requested during that 30-day window, that clock resets. So you get that extra 30 days. And you can see that link in the bottom is a link to the Blackboard help site for alternative formats. It's one of the more useful links that can be provided to students to give them more information on the alternative formats, all the ones that are available, and how they might be used. So depending on how your content is arranged, you may see the alternative format icon in a couple of different places. But the key is to look for that A with that down arrow to the right of it. Indicates that there's an alternative format available for that specific piece of content. And if again, depending on the type of content and where you're looking, you may see it in a different place, but just remember to look for that particular icon. Now, when that icon is clicked, users are going to see a menu showing all the different alternative formats available for that particular file type. So not every format is available for every file type, um, but for each one, the students can select any one of those and download it to their device. So that the first time someone requests a file, it may take a minute for Ally to generate it. And so you might see this little informational window preparing your download. This can take a few minutes. In the vast majority of cases, it's more like a few seconds. It shouldn't take a few minutes. If you have a particularly complex translation, though, um, that may take a little bit of time to generate, but it usually is not on the scale of minutes. It's usually much shorter than that. So I want to kind of go through and talk about the different alternative formats, and then we're going to jump into a demo site and see each one. So the first one we've kind of alluded to briefly previously, and it's the OCR PDF. Now this file type will only be available when the initial content was a scanned PDF. You won't see it for a Word document or an HTML document. OCR does stand for optical character recognition. Uh, and as you may know, when you scan a document, typically what you're doing is you're taking an image of that information and saving it to a PDF. So since it is an image, it makes it very difficult to highlight text, copy and paste, search for information, and it cannot be used by tools like a screen reader. So that's why it's considered a very severe issue and is a very inaccessible document. The Ally OCR version, however, does extract the text from the pages and making it so it can be searched, copied, pasted, etc. If you're familiar with the technology, it uses Abby Fine Reader behind the scenes, and it does a very good job with most documents. Though there's always the caveat, kind of the garbage in, garbage out idea. So if you have a very dark, very blurry, very hard to read initial scanned PDF, you might have a harder time decoding that information, but it does a pretty amazing job with most content. Next type is the tagged PDF. This is typically what we think of when we think of a PDF document. It's an accessible document. It does have semantic information included. And by that, I mean it'll have information about headings, titles, image descriptions, table headings, and so on, but only if that information was present in the original document. One of the themes we'll kind of come back to several times today is the more accessible you can make your initial content, the better off those alternative formats are going to be, and the more useful they're going to be for the users that request those types. The tag PDF tends to be, in most institutions I've worked with, the most popular or one of the most popular choices by students. I think maybe because most people are familiar with PDFs, most devices can natively render PDFs. So this is great if there's a Word document posted and you may not have the Word app on your device. You can easily download a PDF, which can be used on just about any sort of platform. And you'll see that PDF format available when the initial file type is a Word or PowerPoint presentation. Next is the HTML, which can seem like an odd choice for a alternative format, but it is a very lightweight format. It doesn't take up a lot of space on a device. It's great for offline use. It's responsive, which means it's going to fit, the content will fit to the screen of the device it's on. So it's really going to eliminate a lot of pinching and zooming and scrolling left and right. You really only have to worry about scrolling up and down, which is much easier on the user. HTML works really well with things like screen readers. So for those students who use that sort of technology, HTML is a very popular format, and it's available for all the file types Ally supports except for HTML, since the document is already in HTML format anyway. Next is the EPUB, and the EPUB is a very versatile format designed for use on book readers, and it could be a physical book reader such as a Kindle type device, or a mobile device that has an EPUB reading app. Much of the features of this format depend on the app that's using it, but most in general will do things like allow you to customize the font size, the colors. You'll be allowed to highlight the information, take notes, set bookmarks, and things like that. I have a free one, a free EPUB reader that I'll show you in a few minutes that does a lot for free, which is great. And the EPUB format is available for all the different document types that Ally supports: PDF, Word, PowerPoint, and HTML. Next is the audio, and we kind of briefly talked about this one as well. This is a text-to-speech version. It creates an MP3 file, which is usable on just about any type of device. As we said, it's great for those users who like to multitask and do something while they're listening to that content. Like with that tag PDF, the audio also has the semantic information present as well, if it is in the original document. So if I'm listening, I could hear things about, the paragraph structure, headings and titles. If I got to a point where a image was and it had a description, that image description would be read out to the user. So it really is going to give the listener uh, kind of a good idea of what that document looks like, even though they don't have it in front of them or may not have it in front of them. If the language is set, then Ally will read in the voice and using the pronunciation of that language. So if you have a document that's in Spanish, it'll be read in Spanish using that pronunciation. If it's not set, Ally will do its best to try to determine the language. And if there's more than one language present, Ally will pick the one that's the majority and go with that. It won't switch back and forth in the document. There's a current 200,000 character limitation, which works out to about around 5 hours per document. This was recently raised about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was 100,000 characters, so it's been recently doubled. Typically, however, we don't see faculty created content hitting that limit. More often, it's publisher content that runs into that. Um, right now, the current, so if 5 hours is not enough, right now the workaround is to kind of manually break that content up into smaller documents and post those to Brightspace. So the one format that I unfortunately will not be able to demonstrate today is the electronic braille. Typically with users who need this format, they would download that file to a local device. It may have a braille display, so it might have an area where you have raised pins that will generate the braille characters so that someone who is visually impaired can read that document. Um, again, it's hard, in this kind of format to show that device. I don't have that one of those devices um, anyway, but it does use the Braille Ready file format. And for English documents, it uses the Grade 2 Unified English Braille. And there's more information. I did provide a link for more information. Even though I won't be able to demonstrate it, you can find out more about that format as needed. The next is the Beeline Reader, and this was developed by the aptly named Beeline Group. And their goal was kind of twofold. They wanted to improve screen reading, so to kind of reduce eye strain for those of us who stare at a computer screen all day, uh, but also to really help people read faster. So they wanted to improve speed reading. And the way they did it is to use a color gradient. So one line would start with a certain color and then kind of gradually fade and end with another color. And the next line would start with the same color the previous line ended with. So the end result is to really guide the eye across the page and down. And they did find that it did really help with speed reading, but it also helped those individuals that had dyslexia, ADHD, and other learning differences. So there were more benefits than they even thought at the beginning. This is this is one of the first formats that can be configured at the institution level. So you can turn this on or off. Currently, it is enabled, so this format is enabled by default. And to be honest, I'm not aware of any institution that have chosen to disable the Beeline Reader. It is a pretty useful format. I know a lot of people actually tend to convert their documents to Beeline just for the eye strain purposes, and not necessarily for being able to read something faster. Though it does help with that, or can help with that. Next is the translated version. And this is a machine translated version similar to Google Translate, though Ally uses an Amazon service to do the translation. The original intent was to support those students taking courses in a language other than their primary language, so they could have a better way to kind of consume that content, make it easier for them to understand what was being gone over. Realize, though, that this can be problematic for those teachers of foreign language courses who may not necessarily want students to have instant one-click access to translating a particular document. So this format is also configurable at the institution level, and it can be disabled, or it can be enabled. But currently, it is disabled by default, which means that the translated version right now is not available for any students. But you can enable it if you choose. I know that on the latest Ally roadmap, uh, there I think they're working on a feature where you can enable or disable this at the course level. I know a lot of people have been asking for that feature, and I think they're working on it. I'm not sure when that will be released, but I know that that is coming, where you can turn this on or off at the course level rather than the institution level. Right now, if you want to have it enabled for the institution, but you have some faculty who may not want that feature, You can disable alternative formats on a file by file basis, and I'll demonstrate how to do that when we kind of look at our live demonstration. And then the last alternative format that we'll look at is the immersive reader. And the immersive reader is a tool by Microsoft. It's a lot of customization, a lot of flexibility in how a user can read a document. So you can change things like font size, line spacing, and so on. You have different color themes. It really shines around parts of speech and grammar, so you can break words up into syllables. You can highlight parts of speech like nouns and verbs and adjectives and so on. It has a picture dictionary, so if you click on a word, it'll show a picture representation of that word. Similar to the audio format, it will read the text back to the user. The difference here is it will highlight the words as it's being read, so a user can follow along. You can also customize the speech. You can have a male or female voice. It will also translate the content. You can either translate the entire document as a whole or do it word by word, and yet you can then hear uh, the different pronunciation of those words. It's worth mentioning that if the translated alternative format is disabled at the institution level, then the translation functionality is not enabled in the immersive reader either. So it's not going to act as a workaround for students to be able to translate content. And just so you know, this alternative format is also, like the previous two, also configurable at the institution level. It is enabled by default, but you can turn it off if you wish. Before we jump kind of into live demonstration, I just want to go back to the HTML version for a second. I wanted to mention that one of the other benefits of the HTML version is that in some cases it will fix some accessibility issues. So if text has contrast issues, so lighter font on a light background, the HTML version will correct that, as will the EPUB. So if you were to score those alternative formats, they would result in a slightly higher score. So this is one of those semi-random points where I'll stop and say, are there any questions before we move on to our live demonstration? Good question. So that's a really good question. Um, I don't think so. Because you're not changing the work, it's just a different format of the work. Uh, I will throw out the disclaimer that I am not a copyright expert, but I believe that it is not a copyright issue. However, if there is concern about a particular format or a particular work being a copyright issue, the alternative formats could be disabled on that file as well, similar to what we mentioned with the translated version. And I'll make sure to show you how to do that in just a second, so that if there is some concern, you can turn off the alternative formats for that file. And then certainly an instructor can do that for something that maybe they have created themselves if they want to, for reasons of intellectual property, not have alternative formats generated for that. That's a really good question. I see Kim looks like Kim is typing a question, so I'm going to hold off. Yeah, does it check websites? That's a great question. It does, but it's a different product. So there's a product called, oddly enough, Ally for Web that does do websites. All right, I'm going to stop sharing, at least this piece here, and I'm going to switch over to my second screen. So I'm hoping that everyone can see my screen. If you can't see it, yell out. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that we're good. This is just my demos Brightspace environment. I have a couple of just sample units, demo units with just some content in there. Um, I have this Vincent van Gogh document that's going to provide the basis for the alternative formats that we use. It's a Word document. I want to show you the original Word document just so you see what the original looks like, so we can compare it to the outcome of some of the alternative formats. And also we'll see if any of those alternative formats you know, will fix some of those more minor accessibility issues. Um, so this is, again, typical Word document. It's got some tables, it's got some images and so on. There are several accessibility issues. For example, This looks like a title. It's larger font at the top of the page. I can assume it's a title, but since it's not explicitly marked as such, Ally's not going to assume that we want that to be a title. Um, so you will have the issue. This document does not have titles. Same with the subtitle here. Um, this also has a contrast issue. So I've got that lighter font and a light background, which may make it difficult for some users to read. And I've got several instances of that throughout this document. The more, contrast is one of those things that stacks. So the more contrast issues you have, the lower that score is going to be. I have a table, and this appears to be a table header, but once again, it's not explicitly marked as a table header. So that would come up as an issue as well. And then in the images, none of the images have alt text. So that would be the final accessibility issue in this document. So there are several things we would need to fix, and we'll go ahead and we'll do that in the second part of our discussion today. Right now, we're just going to look at the alternative formats. So I just wanted to make sure you saw the original document so we can do some comparisons. I'm going to quit this. And I'm going to click on this document. And you can see right above it, I've got this alternative formats icon. So I'm going to click on that. And you can see these are all the different alternative format options available for that particular documents. And I'm just going to start with the tag PDF. And I'm going to hit that download button. And you can see it's pretty quick to convert that to a tag PDF. So I'm just going to save it. And I'm going to open up in my Acrobat Reader just so we're comparing apples. Oops, not that one. Wrong one. Let's try this one. So this is the PDF version. You can see it looks almost identical to the initial Word document. I still have a title, but it's not marked as such. I still have those contrast issues, table issues, and my pictures don't have alt text. If I had marked these as headings and subheadings and so on, when I click on this bookmark option, I would see some navigation on this left or this right-hand side, and it would be much easier for me to jump to a particular section. So on this document, which is only 7 pages, that's not as big a deal. But if I'm dealing with a document that's, 30, 40, 100 pages, being able to quickly navigate from section to section could be very useful. And it would make it easier for anybody to navigate through the document. So important to mark those as headings and subheadings to make it better for your users. We'll go back and we'll look at the HTML. Download here. This is just going to open up right in my browser. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. One of the things you'll notice is the contrast issues have been fixed. So whereas these were very light font on that light background, now they're a normal darker color on a lighter background, making it a little bit easier to read. If I were to have Ally score this document, it would have a higher score. We also said that this is responsive, so it's going to fit the width of my window. And if I shrink it, notice how it shrinks the information. So if I was going to put this on a mobile device, such as a phone or an iPad, it would much more easily fit that screen, making it potentially easier to read that document. Also, it's important to note that even though I did that, I don't have, because those things like image descriptions weren't in the original, I don't have them in the HTML as well. The EPUB, save that. And I'm going to open that in my free ebook viewer app. Takes a second. So it's taking in my EPUB viewer longer to create than it did for Ally to make it. I can navigate through this in a number of ways. So similar to what you would see on a physical device, I can kind of click on the sides to go through. I can use my mouse to scroll, using the scroll button on the mouse to go through page by page. This is responsive. So if I make it bigger, the text will fit. Notice like the HTML, the contrast issues are fixed. But one of the advantages of the EPUB format is some of the features that it has that maybe the HTML would not. So I could highlight, and I could choose the highlight option, and I could then also add a note to this highlight and create that. And as you probably can see, I can change the color of the highlights if I wanted to have it a different color to kind of color coordinate my note-taking style. And those are certainly saved from time to time when I'm using this. If I right click on this, I do have some additional features with this, so I can have it read aloud. Though the reading aloud isn't quite as good as either the immersive reader or the Ally audio. So the voice doesn't sound as nice, but it can be done. And you can see that I can do some, change the font size and update the preferences and so on, add some bookmarks. Right now, I'm just going to go ahead and quit and go to the next alternative format, which is the Braille. But again, as we said, this is the one I will not be able to show you, unfortunately. Uh, I do want to move to the audio version. And for this, I have a version of this document where I've fixed all the accessibility issues and created an audio version of that. I want to play that for you so that you can hear the semantic components, so things like the titles. So in order to do so, I'm going to, so let me just drag that over here. It's 9 minutes. I'm not going to play all 9 minutes. I'm going to play about 11 seconds, but I do need to reshare really quickly. So give me 1 second while I just reshare that one tab and make sure I share the audio. So I'm going to play this.
Title, Summary of Van Gogh's Life. Begin paragraph text, Vincent van Gogh. Begin heading level 1, Summary of Van Gogh's Life. Begin paragraph text, Vincent van Gogh.
And again, I'm not going to play the whole thing. Hopefully you had a chance to hear things like, what the title was, what the heading levels were, the paragraph text, and so on. If we had let it read down to the point where we had the images, it would have read the description of the image, so we know what was there. So really giving that listener a kind of a mental picture of what that document looks like, which can be really helpful. All right, so let me stop sharing, close that, and let me reshare my screen. Okay, let me look at just refresh my page really quickly. There we go. Okay, the Beeline Reader is the next alternative format. And the Beeline Reader is just a little custom piece of HTML. So we're going to open that up on our browser again. And here you see the color gradients that the Beeline Reader format uses. So for example, this line here starts in blue, gradually fades to black. The next line starts with black and goes to red. Next line starts with red and so on. So again, that the end result is to kind of draw the eye through the page. Like the other HTML formats, this is responsive, right? So I can change the size, so it's very usable on a mobile device. I do have some customization in terms of the color scheme, so I can choose sort of a more muted colors if those are too bright. I can look at just shades of blue or gray, or I can look at it in night mode, which I really like the night mode. For me, the colors really pop off the page. Um, but there are a number of options so that hopefully you can find one that works well for you. Next is the immersive reader. As we said, the immersive reader was the Microsoft tool. It's going to open up in kind of the same window. Like the audio version, it can be read back to you. I'm going to hit play. You're probably not going to hear anything on this and I won't reshare because we've already heard it once. I will play it for a second though, just so you can see The difference in that as it's read, you'll highlight word by word. So when I hit play, so hopefully you could see that it was reading, at least it was highlighting the words as it's being read. So it's great to follow along for users. You can change the speed. So if you want to make it a little bit slower or a lot faster, you can do so. And you can change to a male or female voice, whichever you prefer. There are some other formatting options available. Uh, so you can, if you want to have more text on the page, you can certainly do that, or you can make it bigger if that helps. You can, by default, there's a lot of spacing between the lines, but if you want to see more text on the page, you can turn that off. You have a limited number of font choices for the page. Um, you also have some themes. There's a lot of different color themes. Many of them are very similar. It just becomes a preference of what you kind of like. I typically stay with the kind of the default, black on white. We mentioned that the immersive reader can highlight syllables, so it'll break each word into the syllables. I can highlight nouns. I can change the color. I can do the same thing for verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. If I start to get a lot of them on the page, I can show labels, so it'll show a letter above each one to make it even clearer what I'm looking at. I'm going to turn that off for right now. And you can enable line focus. So if you are a person that may be distracted by a lot of text on the page, you can turn that line focus on so that now when I read, it's only going to show one line at a time and highlight each word within that line. So I don't have that other distraction. But if you want to, not sure why I can't change to one of the other ones, but you should be able to show 3 lines or 5 lines on the screen itself. It does have a picture dictionary. Actually, let me turn that line focus off. If I have the picture dictionary, did I have that turned on? I thought I did. Let me do the magic of refreshing the page. Let me try to find. There we go. Sometimes a page refresh. So you can see I click on oil, it shows some possible pictures that could represent oil. Um, bold shows me bold. In this case, it's a font. Then I also have the translation functionality. So if I go ahead and choose a particular language, for example, I can do Dutch. Right. The default is just to show it word by word. So if I click on a particular word, I see the Dutch version of that word. If I can also hear it being spoken back to me. Again, since I don't have the audio first set up for this particular tab on my computer, you wouldn't be able to hear it. I can also show the entire document. So it'll translate the entire document to Dutch. And I have it in Dutch here. If I were to hit play, it would read it back in that language. So again, there's a lot to appreciate in this particular alternative format. And then finally, the last for this particular file is the translated version. And so I'm just going to pick a language that I know I haven't. I'm going to pick Italian since I haven't done that one. When I hit download, what I'm looking for is that window that says, you're downloading your file. It may take a few minutes, and it didn't. So let me try. I'm trying to have it kind of slow. So let me try finish. Yeah, there we go. So preparing your download. Hopefully you saw that flash up. Um, as we said, a few minutes can be a little bit deceptive. It usually is much, much faster than that. So if I do download the finished version, if I open it up in another, notation is another piece of HTML, which can be easily downloaded to a device, used by a screen reader, whichever tool a student may prefer. But now I have that translated version of that document, and you can see my browser is recognizing it as finished and would ask me to translate it. I'm not going to translate it right now, so they just finished translating it. But like any HTML, also responsive, you know, makes it easy to use on a mobile device. Pictures will shrink and so on. Before I leave, before I demonstrate the last format, I just want to point out one thing here. In the lower left here is a help link, and by default, cancel this. By default, that help link will take users to the Blackboard site, the Ally Blackboard site for alternative formats. There's actually that link I showed you early on in the presentation that describes all the different alternative formats. But you have the option to customize the behavior of that link so that you could uh, change it so that your user could go to a particular resource on your website, or enable a chance for them to ask an expert that you have on staff a question about alternative formats or accessibility. And we'll cover how to do that in tomorrow's institution report session when we go over the configuration options. But just know, and this is an example of something that's been customized, so you can have users write a question, write custom text here, and include multiple links for your users to access. And this is what the custom dialog box looks like. Now, the one alternative format we haven't really looked at yet was the OCR version. So I do want to take a look at that. I'm going to download this really quickly so I can look. I want to look at it in my Acrobat Reader, just to compare apples to apples. So this is that, it's a scanned PDF. You can see it looks like a chapter from a textbook or some sort of book put onto a scanner. I've got kind of that line in the middle where the light didn't quite hit it right. On this page, for example, uh, I've got links that are not clickable. I can't, I'm trying to highlight text and I can't do it. If I try to search for something like project, can't find anything because, again, this is just an image, so it can't pick out the individual words. I've even got vertical text here, and this, again, looks like kind of a darker font on a darker background, so that might be a contrast problem. So this is considered a very inaccessible document. But let's go ahead and do the alternative formats. Now you can see for the first time, since this was a scanned PDF, I have this OCR'd PDF at the top. I don't see tagged PDF anymore, just the OCR'd PDF. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to click that download option. Now this is the one I should have waited, and because it's complex, it could take a few minutes to do. If you do have a document or documents that is taking a long time, just note that once the process starts, you can hit the cancel button, and that process will still run in the background. So if you start it, you can hit cancel and go away, and then come back, and it should, in theory, be available to download. And I actually am going to do that right now. I'm going to cancel just so in the interest of time. The last thing I want to show you is I did mention that you can disable alternative formats on a file by file basis. So while that's cooking in the background, I want to show you that really quickly. In order to do so, I have to bring up the instructor version. So I'm going to bring up the instructor version of this site. And same site, but I'm signed as a teacher or a faculty member. And one of the differences you'll be able to see is next to this alternative format icon is this instructor feedback icon. And that's giving me some a relative look at the accessibility of that document. Students will never see this, only faculty will. So that's one of the ways you can quickly tell if you're looking at it as a faculty member or not. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the alternative formats. I'm learning that Brightspace I've got to refresh fairly often. And since I'm logged in as a faculty member this time, at the top of this alternative format window, I have a down arrow. And when I click on that, I get the option to disable alternative formats for this file. So if I click on that, I get the message, the alternative formats for this file have been disabled, and I can go ahead and close that. So now, as a student, If I go back to that Van Gogh document and try to make alternative formats, I get the message, the alternative formats for this file have been disabled. So this is great to use in the case of if you have a file that, alternative or a translated version is turned on, but you have a file that you don't want students to translate, you can turn those alternative formats off. Or if you're concerned about copyright or for reasons of intellectual property, an instructor can turn off the alternative formats for a particular file. To turn it back on, you would just go back as an instructor, go back to the alternative format, and just click that enable for this file option. I can close that. All right, let's see if this is, let me just refresh this page again and see if I'm able, oops, that's the wrong one. Let me try this again. There we go. So you can see that it finished kind of that formatting process in the background. And now I have an OCR version. I'm going to save it to my computer. I'm going to open that up with my Acrobat Reader. So just as a quick refresher, here was that original document. Let's go to that same page. Here's the OCR'd version of that document. You can see the links are now clickable. I can select text. I can highlight, uh, manipulate the text if I had something like Acrobat Pro. That chapter 5 on the right-hand side, it managed to decode that as a chapter 5. So even though there were some contrast issues there, it still figured that out. If I search for project this time, I'm getting 96 matches of that word. So the text is searchable. So this is now a much more usable document than certainly this version was. Now it's not 100% perfect. If I look in the upper corner here, I can probably tell that this looks like a chapter 5. But if I try to zoom in on that with my zoom, you can see it didn't quite get chapter 5 out of there. And all that stuff in the middle, uh, it made it a number 1. So there's certainly something I could clean up. Um, this cost estimate, this doesn't line up with the rest of the bullets, but from an accessibility standpoint, this is still a more accessible document, and it was a couple clicks of the button to get that. So it's very easy to create a more accessible version of that scanned PDF. One last thing that I'd like to show you before we kind of turn our attention to the instructor feedback part is uh, we mentioned copyrighted documents. So if a document has been specifically marked as copyrighted, so I think you can do that with PDFs. If you have like Acrobat Pro, you can either password protect a document or mark it as copyrighted. So if I click on it, I can see it and I can read the document. Certainly it has some contrast issues, so that it might be nice to make an alternative format where it would fix some of that. But if I click on the alternative icon, it looks like, oh, okay, I can do it. And I'll make an HTML, so hopefully that would fix the contrast. But if I click on download, I get the message, we're sorry, we're unable to generate the alternative format because of copyright restrictions. So you can mark documents like PDF as copyrighted, and you won't be able to make alternative formats of that. Okay, before I jump back to the slides and start talking about the instructor feedback tool, are there any questions about alternative formats? We can always come back if there are, but this is one of those places to kind of pause. Okay, then I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to pull up my slides again for just a second. Bear with me while I grab those. And let's take a look at the instructor feedback options. So the instructor feedback, the goal of that tool uh, is really twofold. And one is, uh, in the short term, it wants to help faculty or instructional designers, whoever's building courses, make the content more accessible. So the way it does that is it's going to give you some feedback on how accessible a particular piece of content is, and then it's going to provide step-by-step instructions on how to fix it. to make that content better, how to raise that score. So as faculty work with existing content, they're making it better, raising those scores, which certainly makes it better for students. Now, the long-term goal is as people work with Ally more, learn more about the accessibility issues and accessibility in general, that as they're designing content for upcoming courses, future courses, they're doing so with accessibility in mind, so that the content they create is at the beginning more accessible. So whatever they're uploading to Brightspace is already better for students and everyone who needs more accessible content. So there's a few different ways that Ally is going to give some feedback on how accessible that content is. And the first is very visually. So we saw those on the instructor page. We saw that was that scoring gauge. And Ally uses the red, yellow, green kind of traffic light model where red is considered low accessibility, yellow is a little higher, and green is much better. And you can see the relative percentages listed there. This can be a problem for those individuals with red-green color blindness. So there's a little dial in there. Some people refer to that as the gas gauge or speedometer. And if it's pointing more towards the left, that's lower accessibility scores. More toward the right is higher. And when you move the mouse over that particular tool, you're going to get an indication of the level of accessibility of that content. One of the things we recommend is that when users are ready to kind of start to fix content, is they have the original document open in one area in their computer and Brightspace open in another, so they can kind of walk through those steps. And I want to go ahead and demonstrate that now. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and this is much easier to see. There's going to be a lot more slides in the presentation that I send you later on. You're more than welcome to go through those. I just think that it makes more sense just to kind of see it in action rather than, kind of being watching it passively. Okay, so let me jump onto my instructor version. And we can see here that I have the tool here. And when I put the mouse over it, it says accessibility score low, select to improve. So if I go ahead and click on that, it opens what's called the instructor feedback workflow. And so
Are you sharing your
again,
screen? Because I'm not seeing
nope,
it.
nope, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? And I do appreciate you saying something. I made sure not to share my slides anymore and then immediately forgot to share the screen. How about that?
Good.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking. I appreciate that. So let me go back and just show you that when I do put the mouse over, you get that tooltip accessibility score low, select to improve. And then when I click on it, it opens up the instructor feedback workflow. We'll go over the parts of this window in a second, but I just want to reiterate that the goal is to have this open up in one area in your computer and then the original document open up somewhere else. So you have access to both in an ideal world. So in this window on the left-hand side, the kind of the maybe 3/4 of the screen or so is the preview window, and it's going to show a preview of the document you're working on. And up in the upper left-hand corner, you can navigate page by page through that document. In the middle up here, we're seeing whatever current accessibility issue we're focusing on. What Ally does is, even if there are multiple issues in a particular document, it's going to pick one to focus on. And in this case, images without a description is the first one we're going to look at. And you can see there are 4 images that don't have a description. If I wanted to jump from image to image, I could do so by clicking on the up and down arrows. If I, for some reason, didn't like that border, like it looks like it's blocking some of the words, I could turn that off. I could leave it on, and I can navigate between each instance of those image without description. Can zoom in and out using these tools here. And then if, we said that it's ideal to have, a working copy of the document open somewhere. If you weren't sure where in your computer that original was, you can click this button to download the original from Brightspace itself. So we'll just download it from this website. So the Ally is going to pick one issue to focus on, but they're a document may have multiple issues. So if I want to see what all the issues are, I can click on that All Issues button, and we see that there are 4 different accessibility items listed here. If I wanted to really worry about documents that does not have headings, I could click on that and focus on that. But I'm going to stick with images without a description. The goal is to not overwhelm faculty at first by saying, here's everything that's wrong with your document, now go fix it. It's just, one at a time, we'll fix that, then we'll move on to the next one. So whenever I select a particular issue to work on or go with whatever Ally suggests, I'm going to get a couple buttons here in the middle. First of all, what does it mean when it says this document contains images without a description? It's going to give some context for, what that really means, what alt text is, what an alternative description is. And then if I hit the right arrow, it's going to talk about why I should use these. Why is it going to make it better for students if I can add alternative text to my images? So it's kind of the rationale of why should I fix this particular issue? And then the second button here is how to add descriptions. So if this is the why I should do this, this is the how we should do this. If I click on how to add descriptions, I see that I have another option to download the original. Yeah. Just another place to do the same thing as this button. And then since this was a Word document, Ally knows it's a Word document, it's going to provide some choices for maybe some programs I might use to fix that content. I'm going to use just Office 365. And once I select my program of choice, it's going to give me step-by-step instructions on exactly how to add alt text to those images. One more option to download the original. And then, right-click the image, select Edit Alt Text, add the descriptions, and so on. Most of this information is going to be the same regardless of the document. There are always going to be these pictures of the Starry Night by Van Gogh. But this number here will be dependent on how many actual images there are in the document, so that will update. So again, step-by-step instructions on how to do this, but to go above and beyond that, some kind of tips on how to write a good description. So if I click on that, and again, as users become more familiar with Ally, they will probably are not going to need to click on that every single time. But for the first few times they're working with a particular issue, it may be helpful to kind of get some tips or best practices on how to add descriptions or add headings or whatever that particular issue is. But in this case, writing a good description could just mean providing a textual alternative. So for those users not seeing the image, they get an idea of what's there. So a farmer staying in a field of yellow canola crops with a sign in the foreground may be a good textual description of that image. By default, if you just add an image that does not already have a description, uh, many LMSs will just add the file name as a description, which in most cases probably won't be super helpful. So if that is the case, you want to make sure to go ahead and change that, giving it a more descriptive uh, description of what's in that particular image. If I found that image on the internet somewhere and put a link to it as the description, that's great. It's nice to know where it came from. Better to put the link and a description of what is happening in that particular image. Recognizing that context is important. So the same image could be used in 2 different courses and have 2 completely different descriptions. So if I have this image and I'm using the history class, I could talk about the symbolism that those flowers represent. If I'm using that in an art class, I may reference the technique the painter might have used, the colors chosen, the brushstrokes used to create that image. If I have a graph, again, someone who's not able to directly see that graph, it's important for them to know the relative percentages. So making sure to include those percentages in that written description is very important so that users get an idea of what that graph is representing. You can also mark an image as decorative. So if it purely is decorative and doesn't serve any other purpose, you can mark it as such, and Ally will not score that image negatively against you. For those instructors or users who like to have instructions kind of printed out next to them as they're going through it, you can print that out and have those in a nicely formatted document to refer to. You'll also notice that there's one more help link here. So similar to what we saw in the alternative formats window, there's a help link here. By default, that's going to take users to the Ally help site for instructors. So for any instructor topic, not just the instructor feedback tool. Like the alternative formats, you can customize this as well. You can choose a different set of links, different text, different expert users to email to. And again, we'll show you how to do that tomorrow when we do the configuration piece. But if you've gone through, you've made those changes, you have your document open somewhere, you've added the alt text, you can go to next, and I can upload my fixed document. I actually do have somewhere. I have a version of the document where I fixed both the contrast issues and the images themselves. So I'm going to upload that version and just put that here, and it's going to upload it. And notice that I went from a 30% to a 40%, and I've eliminated two of those issues. Now in the preview, I can see that what was a contrast issue before has now been fixed. And those images will have alt text added. If I close this, notice how the page refreshed and the icon above the preview has changed. Now it says accessibility score medium, select to improve. So that's usually how quickly Ally works, and now it's just regenerating the preview with those fixes in place. And I can see that there. One other thing, a couple other things before we kind of look at that again. I want to go back to, this is kind of just a general HTML page in Brightspace. I want to point out that you can create alternative formats of that. So if you have instructors that like to enter just text directly into Brightspace without having a Word document, you can, students can generate alternative formats of that content as well to have that. And there's also the option, it's one of the features of Ally. You can turn it on or off. It's currently enabled in our demo environment, but I've enabled it so that you also can have Ally work on these areas as well. So if I click on this, rather than having a new document, I would be able to fix issues here. And again, I think there's an issue with Brightspace and the HTML, or at least these HTML areas with it showing them. I know Ally is working with Brightspace to get that fixed, but I do want to point out that there is that option as well. Okay. Last thing I want to kind of go over is the accessibility report, which is another tool that Ally provides to instructors and course designers. When you have first turned on Ally and enabled Ally in the courses, if there is a lot of content that needs fixing, it can be overwhelming to someone to kind of go through all the content and say, okay, well, I've got to fix this one, I've got to fix this one and this one. Potentially, that could take a lot of time and again be overwhelming, seeing all the different things that need to be fixed. It's also hard to know where to start, what might make the most impact on where to start, and that's really where the accessibility report comes in. And usually, the accessibility report is located on the toolbar, the nav bar up here. It may be under a more option. In this instance, it's located right on the nav bar itself. So if I click on that accessibility report, what that's going to do is it's going to give me a kind of an overview of the accessibility of my particular course. So in this case, the overall score is a 34%. So that's really an average of all the scores and all the content in this course. This is certainly not a typical course. I mean, it is a demo course. I don't have a ton of content in just 14 different files. Certainly in a production course or an actual course, there could be hundreds, if not potentially thousands of files. So again, thinking about fixing all those could potentially be very overwhelming. Just looking through the different components of this page, I see that, first I have just a breakdown of the types of content. So that shows me how many PDF, images, Word documents, HTML files, and presentations are in the course itself. If I click on this content button, it's going to show a list of the different content items in the course arranged by score, so from lowest to highest. So this is kind of one of the first places I can start to make decisions. I can think, okay, maybe I just want to start with these low scoring items to raise them so they're not 0%. That may be where I want to start fixing content. All the different columns are sortable, so I could, in theory, sort by score from highest to lowest. That may or may not be helpful depending on how much content you have. If I see like a whole page of 100%, I already know those are good, so I might not want to do that. But I could sort by issues. So if I sort by that column, I can see that this particular document has 6 issues. That may potentially affect more students than a document that may have just one particular issue. Right? 6 issues is a lot of different accessibility issues. I might want to reduce that number. So that may be a good starting place. And because these columns are sortable, you can also sort by the title as well. Again, I'm not sure, in terms of fixing accessibility, how helpful that is, but it's worth pointing out that you can do it. I'll go back to this overview tab and just note that this view button will take you to the exact same place as the content button did. You can see they're both highlighted. So just 2 different ways to get to the same spot. So one of the other ways that Ally is going to help is you can see over here on the right, there are a couple of different categories. So the first category is usually content with the easiest issues to fix. So these are very quick ways to raise the accessibility scores on a particular piece of content. So if I'm an instructor that maybe doesn't have a lot of time, which I think is all instructors, I might want to focus on the items in this category, so I can get it's kind of a quick return on my time investment. So if I click on the start button, I see it looks like most of these are images. So I'm going to click on this Play-Doh pick and see what the issues are. And it says this image is missing a description. And then, I'm back in my instructor feedback workflow, and I want to be able to write I have the same how to write a good description. This is an image, a bust of Plato, a famous philosopher. And I could add that. Notice that I went from a 19, I think, to a 94%. So that when I close this, notice that image faded and disappeared. It was removed from this list. Now there's only 4 issues. If I fixed all the issues in this category, this whole category would disappear. This next one would move up to take its place, and another category would move in to the bottom here. I believe there are 7 different categories in total. In the follow-up email I'll send later today, I'll include all the different categories, so you'll have reference to those. So this is another way that Ally is going to help instructors fix content, is by providing these categories. And if a particular item was in more than one category, it would be removed from both when I fixed it. So down at the bottom is yet another way that Ally can kind of categorize and organize things. And in this case, it's organizing by accessibility issues themselves. So this is a list of all the accessibility issues present in all the content in this course. Originally, it is sorted by severity, so from most severe to least severe. Almost always, the number one severe item is the document is scanned but has not been OCR'd. And if I click on that, I can see the different versions of that, and I can choose to fix those issues and have them removed from this list. This can be helpful if you have an instructor who may learn how to do one particular way to fix one particular item or one particular accessibility type, and wants to focus on just that at first. So maybe they become really good at fixing contrast issues, and they're going to go through and fix everything with a contrast issue and knock those out. Then they're going to worry about learning, I'm going to fix tables that don't have headers. I'll focus all on that content next. Again, just different ways to think about starting to how to fix that content. You can filter by the different headings as well. So I can look for, multiple content affected. So there are 3 documents that don't have a language set. So you could choose to focus on the items that have or crop up the most frequently and help more students that way. Once again, you can filter by issue, but filtering by severity or content affected probably are the most useful ways to do that. One last thing that I wanted to show you, just to kind of wrap things up and bring it full circle, before we kind of stop and ask for some questions, is to go back and look at I have a fixed version of that Vincent van Gogh document, and this is one where all the issues have been fixed. So I've fixed the table headings, I've fixed image descriptions, contrast issues, and titles, and so on. You can see the score here is perfect. I'm going to go to the alternative formats, and similar to what I did at the first one, I'm going to download the tag PDF. And I just want to compare it to that first document where we looked at the original Van Gogh document and just see the difference when I add or fix all the accessibility issues. Let me just refresh this page. Still taking a second. Let me try it in the student version. While I'm waiting for that to download, are there any questions on anything so far that you've seen? Whether it's the alternative formats, the instructor feedback, the course accessibility report, any of those end user ally features. Yeah, go ahead, Laura, please jump right on in.
So my question is actually really probably for Steve or Natalie. You said that these reports and such were generated when we first turned Ally on. I'm not seeing any way to access any of these things in any of my existing courses. Like a report, I'm not seeing any alternative formats, options, or anything like that. Is that going to show up in the future? Is it only going to be in future semesters courses? Is there a specific place I should be looking for this?
It hasn't been turned on yet. Sorry, it's
okay.
been turned
okay.
on, but not open to instructors yet.
That's what that okay, that I'll just wait then. That was my only question.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to playing around with it.
Yeah, it looks great. I'm really excited about what this is going to do for us. So.
And that's a great point. I'm just going to kind of add on to that. Ally has scanned all content, so it's the scores have been created. Alternative formats are ready, but as Helen pointed out, nothing shows up for students or instructors until Ally has been enabled in courses. That's a separate process. For those of you who will be in the session tomorrow, we'll go over how to do that and when to do that and the options around that. But as soon as that switch is flipped, and it's a quick toggle, then you will be able to see those icons. So any course in which Ally is enabled, students will see the alternative format icons, and instructors will see both the alternative formats and the instructor feedback icons. I'm not sure why it's deciding to stick on this one particular format, since it's not that complex. Well, it's certainly not worth. Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Thanks, Brian. On that, I guess sort of what I would call a dashboard of the report within a particular course, you mentioned that there were like 7 different categories that can show up, yes, there, and that you would let us know what those are. Is that space customizable so that I could say, if I'm a particular instructor, I want to, I mean, content easiest issues to fix or lowest scoring content, but maybe I wanted a different view on that. Is that area, are those widgets customizable?
No, I think they are. It's a hard coded order.
Okay, great, thanks.
So just very quickly, it's easiest issues to fix, low scoring content, content with severe issues, content with a medium score, content with major issues, content with a high score, content with minor issues. So it's really decreasing in severity as you go through the content. So it's pointing out the lower scores first, or things with lower scores, and then kind of the last few categories are things that are higher scores overall and
Okay,
less critical to fix.
okay, thanks.
Okay, well, again, I do not want it to keep you waiting while this generates, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Are there any other questions that you have today? All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording then.